There was one thing in my life I'd never doubted. My family would always love and appreciate me, at least to some extent. My mom, my dad, my siblings. In all the years we'd spent together, even though they were sometimes cold and distant, I believed I'd grown up with love, that my bonds with my family would always be strong. But that evening, what I experienced at that dinner table shattered everything I'd ever believed. Lately, my mom had started calling more often, speaking in a sweeter tone than usual, which had begun to feel strange to me. A few weeks ago, when she called, her voice was different. "Natalie, you have to come to dinner. It's been so long since the family got together," she'd said. I'd hesitated for a moment. For 10 years, I'd grown accustomed to my family's conditional love. They only reached out when they needed something. But deep down, I still held a glimmer of hope. Maybe this time could be different. Maybe they genuinely missed me. I set out from San Francisco toward my childhood home in Sacramento. I postponed my schedule and canceled busy meetings. As I hit the road, I felt a sliver of peace, as if returning to my old home might bring some comfort. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe I could mend the distance between me and my family. When I arrived and stepped inside, everything felt familiar. The old dining room, filled with the rich, heavy aroma of food, flickering candles around delicate candlesticks, the light of the vintage chandelier. It was all perfectly arranged. But that perfection seemed like a trap to me. Like a kernel of popcorn placed under the table, there was a purpose behind everything. We all sat at the table. My mom, my dad, my younger brother Parker, and my sister Olivia. The spread was more elaborate than usual. But it overwhelmed me so much that I couldn't even taste the food. My mom, as always, served the dishes with great care, while my dad took a sip from his wine glass and surveyed the room. Through a few minutes of eating in silence, my mom suddenly broke the quiet with her voice. "Natalie," she said, "we want you to know now. Your dad and I have finalized our will. This house, the lakefront villa in Tahoe, and everything we own will go to Parker and Olivia." Her words rang in the air, hitting me like a slap across the face. They were said so abruptly, so coldly, that a chill ran through my entire body. Swallowing hard, I set my fork down. "What?" I asked, my voice dry and clipped. But I tried to stay calm, hoping it was some kind of joke. Parker, my little brother, leaned back casually and continued, "Because you don't need it, right? You've got your own company, your own house, a stable life. Mom and Dad think Olivia and I need the support more." My eyes felt like they might pop out of their sockets. Seriously? Was it really that simple to them? "Support," I said, forcing out each word. "Parker, Olivia, have you ever taken any responsibility? Olivia, you can't hold a job for more than 6 months. Parker, how many times have you switched schools? 5? 6? And Mom and Dad kept paying every tuition bill. And now you're the ones who need support." But everyone was silent. Olivia twirled a strand of her golden hair around her finger and smirked mockingly. "So you're keeping track of every penny, Natalie? How stingy can you be?" Her words pierced through me, and I shot her a sharp glare. "Stingy? No, Olivia. I call this fraud. Exploitation. Injustice." My mom suddenly slammed her arms on the table and shouted, "Enough, Natalie! Stop acting like a victim. All you ever think about is money." I was left speechless, but in that moment I realized something. My family had never truly seen me as part of them. The fact that everything I valued most had turned into nothing more than a resource in their eyes showed me that all these years had been an empty game. They'd never really loved me. I was just their financial lifeline. With that realization, there was no point in staying at that table. I didn't say another word and lowered my head. In that moment of silence dominating the table, I had to avert my eyes, trying to make sense of the situation I was in. Slowly, I placed my hands on the table and took a deep breath. This was how it had always been. Whenever I'd asked for something from them, whenever I'd truly needed anything, the response was always the same. A glance, a shrug, maybe a brief moment of eye contact. It was always in some way their way of saying, "You don't deserve this." But that night, I no longer had the strength to endure it. In a room filled with my mom's stern gaze and my dad's frustrated silence, my heart pounded as if it might leap out of my chest. I didn't have to do this. But after all, they were my family. I'd made sacrifices for years. I'd done everything I could to put their lives in order. And now, what was being offered to me? "Pearl, do you really need this?" I said, my voice trembling as if it might break into a cry. "Are you really this indifferent? When did you ever truly see me as a family member? This isn't just about money, it was an emotional investment. I always tried to be good enough, but..." My sentence hung in the air. I couldn't say more because before my voice gave out, the pieces of the wall breaking in my heart had already begun to fall. Olivia's smirk now looked like a bloody mockery in my eyes. She stared at me as if she wanted to belittle me further, to prove everything could be calculated. Parker, meanwhile, got up from the table to refill the wine bottle, but his gaze still felt cold, like a chill pressing down on me. For a while, everyone was silent. In that moment, my mom took a deep breath and lowered her eyes to the floor. The regret in her gaze made me realize something I'd ignored for years. A family, to truly be a family, needed to build trust. For them, above all else, this was a relationship based on self-interest. For me, it had always needed to be more. "What are you waiting for, Nathalie?" Parker asked, his eyes showing not sorrow but a kind of mockery. "Are you trying to make us indebted to you? That huge mountain of an inheritance. Place where everything had to be done perfectly. But you need to accept that it's really this simple. We're all on a journey, and now we're heading down a completely different path from you." These were the words Parker said after all the time he'd spent with me over the years. In that moment, my disappointment turned into a storm brewing inside me. As I began to truly know myself, I realized I'd done nothing but serve others for years. To my family, I'd always appeared as a figure with a single purpose in their eyes. But this time, I'd show them who I was. Olivia quietly sat back down at the table, twirling a strand of her golden hair around her finger and giggling. "You're taking this way too seriously, Nathalie. Are you really saying it's all about money? Is that what truly matters to you?" Answering that question, as hard as it was, filled me with everything that had been building up inside. "No, Olivia. I never saw money as the most important thing. But now, looking back, no one ever truly valued me. No one, not even you, understood the sacrifices I made over the years. You all just took and tried to use me. It wasn't just about money, I wanted to see the meaning of family. But you didn't." My mom slammed her hand on the table, nearly knocking over the glasses. "Enough, Nathalie," she said, her voice so sharp that each word echoed like a wall of sound. "All you think about is money. You've made it an obsession." But this time, something broke inside me. A cold anger spread through my chest. No matter how much my mom yelled, I knew she hadn't realized what she'd put me through all these years. I'd never had real worth to her. I was just a financial lifeline. True love, true value couldn't be reduced to something so simple. Parker shrugged and added, "Everything happens for a reason, right? But you're overreacting. Stop running from the truth. You need to think about all of us. For me, something had ended. I'd realized how empty the life I'd lived had been, how destructive it was to serve others for years. This table, in this family, I was a stranger. I didn't say another word. I took a step and walked out of the kitchen toward the door. A change had begun within me. This was the end of my old life, the harbinger of a new beginning. Outside the house, I stood for a while, breathing in the cool night air. Everything felt like a dream. Part of me struggled to accept that years of bonds, years of sacrifices could shatter in an instant. But another part of me knew I had to face this reality. What I'd said at that table was a kind of breaking point. I needed to end my relationship with my family, but at the same time, I had to rediscover myself while letting them go from my life. Under the yellowish glow of the streetlights, I walked alone. Shoving my hands into my pockets, I quickened my pace, carrying the disappointment and anger that had built up inside me. Why had I stayed silent for so long? Why had I let my family burden me with this weight for years? How had I lost my identity and worth so completely while focusing on everyone else's needs? I walked, asking myself these questions, but finding answers to fill the void inside me wasn't easy. Painful part was that all those years spent serving others had made me forget who I truly was. My dreams, my desires, my wants, they'd all been pushed aside. But that night, what I'd experienced at the dinner table made me realize how wrong everything had gone. On one side were the years of struggle I'd endured. On the other was a family that had never truly valued me. As I left my childhood home behind, I didn't look back. Looking back would mean acknowledging the mistakes I'd made for years. But I'd decided to move forward now. I had to build my own life, guided by my own truths. My family had sidelined me by focusing on others, but I needed to find myself. On the drive back to San Francisco, only one thought occupied my mind: rediscovering my own worth. I realized how much I'd lost myself by doing everything for my family over the years. Now I had to find myself and carve my own path. I wouldn't let anyone make me sacrifice my happiness anymore. My family had always forced me to give something up, but now I'd forge my own way and stop living according to their expectations. When I arrived in San Francisco, I realized how suffocating and constricting my old life had been. Even while building my own business, I'd always tried to serve others. But now everything would change. I had to take steps prioritizing only my own desires and dreams. I needed to find a place that was truly mine. And for the first time in years, I felt fully free. Settling into my room at home, I lingered in the silence for a while. Everything seemed so normal, but the peace inside me was different. Knowing myself, seeing myself stripped of others' expectations gave me a new kind of strength. I was making my own decisions now, moving forward with my own truths. This was just a beginning, but it was profoundly important. That evening, I sat again and listened to my thoughts for a while. I had to rebuild something in my life now. I needed to take ownership of my business, myself, my worth. The pressures from my family, the years of disappointment, perhaps they were finally coming to an end. But now, setting out on my own path would be the best thing of all. I had the strength to do it. Sometime later, my phone rang. Seeing the sudden call stirred a mix of emotions inside me. I decided to let Parker's call go unanswered. I no longer owed him or my family an explanation. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, really. When I rediscovered my worth, I realized I wasn't accountable to anyone. One day, maybe I'd have something to say to them. But right now, all I needed was to find myself and carve my own path. This journey would bring me peace with myself. As the days passed, the peace within me grew stronger. I could see more clearly how fake my relationship with my family had been, how they'd always wanted to take rather than give. Once, my greatest desire had been to see worth in their eyes. But now, all I saw there was selfishness. That wasn't something I could accept. My value couldn't be measured solely by material things. A week later, I returned to my office in San Francisco. As I sat at my desk, organizing my work, I reflected on how everything had changed. I was no longer just a businesswoman. I was a woman who had found her identity. I knew that everything should be shaped around serving myself, not others. My family had built their lives by using me for years, but now I would build my own life. The workload at the office picked up, but this time I approached it with a different perspective. Prioritizing myself, feeling my own worth, and acting not on others' demands but with my inner strength brought me more peace with each passing day. There was a time when I'd worked in this office constantly driven by others' needs, but now everything was clearer to me. I didn't want people to have any say in how they thought my worth should be defined. Only I could determine my own value. One evening, as I looked out my office window, I thought about myself under the city lights. I'd never felt this strong, this free in my life. When I found my own worth, I also learned what I truly wanted in life and what I needed to do. One day, I'd make my family hear my voice to show them who I really was. But that would be my decision, not theirs. That day, I received a phone call. The number belonged to an old friend I hadn't seen in a long time, an old colleague from work whose path had diverged from mine. When we spoke, she invited me in a way I hadn't expected. "Natalie," she said, "there's an opportunity. If you'd like to leverage your past connections, I'd love to see you involved." For a moment, I stayed silent. My ties to the old business world had always been about tirelessly serving others. But now, this opportunity was telling me something different. I would make my own decisions, carve my own path, and not live under anyone else's pressure. Maybe this was the beginning of truly finding my way. Even in the business world, defining my own worth could create a new space of freedom for me. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful," I said. "But right now, I'm moving forward on my own path. Everything has its time." I hung up, but something stirred inside me. Rejecting the opportunities my old life offered and setting out on my own was so liberating. Even though I'd ended my relationships with my family, offers from the old business world were strengthening me further in building my own identity. A week later, I went for a walk outside. The city's crowds no longer affected me the way they used to. Thinking about my family sometimes left an emptiness inside me. But now, that emptiness had opened a space for me to find myself. I slowly made my way toward the city park. That walk felt like the beginning of everything. Finding my identity after so long was something I was finally savoring. I knew now that this wasn't about serving someone else, it was a journey to find myself. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Letting go of everything the past had burdened me with, listening to myself once more, seeing who I truly was, this was the process that rebuilt me. When I found myself, I knew I wouldn't need anyone else. This was the moment that completely ended my need for others' approval. I walked a little longer. The city was quiet, but every moment I spent in it was filled with the satisfaction of setting out on my own path. Now it was the beginning of everything, and I had finally found the strength to carve my own way. For a week, I continued my routine in the city. I slowly organized my work, reviewed old connections, and began taking steps to reshape my life. But every morning when I woke up, there was a sense of peace mixed with a lingering feeling of something missing. This new journey, which allowed me to move forward by setting aside my ties with my family and past relationships, perhaps frightened me. In my mind, the events of that evening still swirled. The faces of my mom, my dad, my siblings, the words they'd said. It was all a disappointment. Seeing that the people I'd thought I loved for years were merely figures benefiting from me still caused pain inside. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and looked out at the city from my office window, my phone rang. Another invitation, another familiar voice. Parker. My brother. Whenever he called, no matter how much I didn't want to, I always answered. There was an emotional tone in his voice on the phone. "Natalie, we need to meet. There's an important family matter." Something broke inside me. These kinds of conversations now only gave me the impression that things were circling back to the past. The same game, the same pressures. But this time, as much as I resisted, I decided to go back. This might be one last confrontation. I needed to resolve things with my family at this point. As I drove from San Francisco to Sacramento, there was an unease within me. But this time, unlike the emotional turmoil of before, I was going with a purpose. I needed this meeting to fully clarify my relationships with my family and move forward in my own life. Their calling me back, there was, in a way, them throwing their responsibilities in my face. Something had to change. I had to accept that. When I entered my childhood home, everything was in its place. That familiar table, the old dining room, a place that felt cold and distant yet appeared so orderly. My family had been feeding me the same lies for years. As I stepped into the room, I first saw Parker's face. He approached me cautiously, but this time the old spark in his eyes was gone. Olivia sat silently, typing something on her phone, her eyes glued to the screen. My mom and dad were seated at the table as usual, but this time the sweet smiles I was accustomed to weren't on their faces. There was just an emptiness. "Natalie, come sit, we need to talk," Parker said. In that moment, the words caught in my throat. "Natalie," he continued. But this time there was neither trust nor love in his voice, just an obvious attempt to patch things up. "It's not that the family doesn't love you, but you need to help us find another way out of this situation." I sat down slowly. My mom and dad's gazes told me more than a single question ever could. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart aching. Something truly needed to change. I had to stand up for myself somehow. My dad took a deep breath. "Natalie, we have to talk about this openly with you," he said. "Your success is very important, but you had the chance to choose your own path, and we know we'll always be by your side. We love you. But sometimes we have to make the right decisions too. For their lives to become stable, we need your support." There was a moment of silence. The anger and disappointment inside me were hidden beneath every word. Slowly, as if I could no longer accept the past, I said, "What do you expect me to do? You didn't think of me, not even a single penny," my voice trembling but clear. "Whenever you wanted something, you dedicated me to it. But now, when I need something the most, what are you leaving me with?" My mom, as if trying to interrupt, said, "Natalie, we love you," but her words just hung in the air. They saw the heartbreak in my eyes and understood it, but there was nothing they could do. After sitting in silence for a while longer, I took a deep breath and stood up. "I'll say just one more thing," I said. "If you truly loved me, you wouldn't expect things from me in such a simple, superficial way. For me, it's not all about money. Finding my own worth again is the most important thing right now." That evening, I left my family for the last time. But this time, I was truly free. My life would be shaped solely by my own worth. After leaving Sacramento, I decided to stay outside the city for a while. I wouldn't waste any more time with the artificial bonds my family offered. I'd create an opportunity to fully find myself. As I set out, there was fear inside me. For years, without realizing it, I'd accepted others' identities and set my own aside. Now, I was stepping into a life shaped by my own truths. But how real was this life? I returned to San Francisco and spent a few days alone with myself. Loneliness was sometimes frightening, but it was also calming. The world outside was still chaotic and rushed, but I no longer wanted to be part of that chaos. I needed to rediscover myself. What did I want? What did I truly love and desire in life? One morning, as I sat in my office, I thought of my old colleague Amelia. A few years ago, I turned down a huge opportunity to help her. I knew Amelia as a woman always working to grow her business, constantly busy with new projects. But back then, my efforts to serve others were so consuming that I couldn't do anything for myself. That time, I'd lost my own worth, focusing solely on meeting others' needs. I opened my phone and found Amelia's number. After all, I'd rejected her offer a few years ago. Now, I didn't know how to explain myself to her. But I made my decision and the phone began to ring. Nathalie! It's been so long. How are you? Hearing her voice, I felt a warmth I'd forgotten over the years. Amelia, it really has been a long time, I said a bit hesitantly. I still regret the answer I gave you a few years ago. Instead of helping you, I was focused on other things. Now I'm actually thinking about how I can assist you. Could we revisit a project together? After a brief silence, I could hear Amelia smiling. Of course. I need you, Nathalie. That opportunity is still there, waiting for you. I'm inviting you into a partnership now. We can do this project together. We can carve our own path. In that moment, something shifted. What I needed was to serve myself, not others. This opportunity wasn't just a step forward in my career, it was a chance to make my own path more defined. This new partnership with Amelia showed me how strong I could be, not just in the business world but personally as well. This opportunity was part of a decision I'd never made before, not pushing myself aside, not living for others, embracing my own worth. That morning, after the phone call, I mapped out how my life would take shape from then on. Slowly but surely, I began taking steps. There was a new excitement within me, but this excitement wasn't tied to the responsibilities the past had burdened me with. It was about my own essence. Rediscovering myself, breaking free from the pressures of my family and all those past relationships, moving forward on a path that was truly mine. Now everything was becoming clear. As I gradually immersed myself in work, my eyes caught a painting hanging on my office wall. Carve your own path, it read. This was no longer just a reminder, it felt like an inner truth. I would truly carve my own path. As the days went by, the projects at work began to develop rapidly. My partnership with Amelia took shape quickly after we reconnected. The opportunity one hadn't taken years ago now brought me genuine peace. I felt more and more each day how destructive it had been to serve others and bow to their demands. One evening, as I worked alone in my office, my mom came to mind. After that final confrontation at the table, I hadn't spoken to my family for days. But I had a feeling maybe one day I'd need to take a step to mend those old relationships. For now, though, I knew everything had to happen in its own time. As I moved forward on my path, I needed more time before approaching those relationships that had left such deep wounds in my past. In that moment, I realized even more the importance of loving my own life, knowing myself, and taking deliberate steps. I'd finally earned the right to live freely. This wasn't just a material reward, it was a spiritual one. In the past few weeks, I fully organized my office in San Francisco. I was focusing on new projects, opening a new chapter in the business world. But something was missing. There was still an unresolved void inside me. That void stemmed from my family ties not being fully severed. Even though I was moving forward on my own path, I needed to confront them again, to close the accounts that truly needed closure. Something had to be clarified. Though the wounds of the past were still fresh, I felt I had to take a step. One morning, I made a bold decision. I picked up my phone and called my mom. At first, I didn't know what to say. For years, I'd suppressed my feelings and bowed to their every demand. But in that moment, I promised myself, this conversation would be a chance to free myself completely from the burdens of the past. After a few seconds of ringing, my mom's voice came through. Nathalie, I was surprised to see you calling. Is everything okay? She said, her tone cautious yet tinged with curiosity. Yes, Mom. Everything's fine, I said, taking a deep breath. But I think there are some things we need to talk about. Things that really need to be cleared up. She stayed silent for a moment. What do you mean, Nathalie? She said, her voice softening slightly. What could be stopping everything from being clear? You've always avoided listening to me anyway. I couldn't accept that. I thought back to that night at the table. Those cold words she'd said. The villa in Tahoe, everything will go to Parker and Olivia. In that moment, I'd realized it was all just a transactional relationship. And that transaction had turned the family concept they taught me into something irreparable. But at that table, I'd realized I needed to find myself. I wouldn't approach them with tears or pleas anymore. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I've always questioned how much you truly valued me. You always talked about how a family needs to stick together. But a family being torn apart, shaped only by self-interest, isn't right. Then, when everything falls apart, I'm the one left alone. I've always moved forward based on your wishes, on others' demands. But now I understand I need to find my own path." Silence. My mom tried to say something but then stopped. She just took a deep breath. "Natalie, we had to do this. We thought about it and decided this was the best option. We all needed support to start somewhere. All of us." "Support?" I interrupted, my voice rising slowly. "You always made it seem like you were supporting me. But in reality, you only took help from me to sustain your own lives. When did you ever truly need me? I was always there, always by your side. But you never wanted to see that. This isn't an end, it's just an awakening." My mom stood silently on the other end of the line, her tone tinged with sadness. The anger inside me grew so intense that I didn't want to keep talking. But I realized something. The void within me no longer stemmed from the burdens of the past. I was writing the end of a story that had lasted years. To rebuild my identity and my life, I finally had to carve my own path. "Then this might be our last conversation," I said. "But one thing is certain. Once I found my worth amidst all this pain and betrayal, I have to move forward on my own path." My mom's voice was soft but broken. "It's hard to see this, Natalie. But maybe one day you'll do the right thing." I hung up. I was still crying inside, but this time the pain was turning into freedom. At last, I'd found my worth and begun taking steps to find my own way. That day, I spoke to my mom one final time and accepted that everything was over. But this ending was the harbinger of a new beginning. When I found my identity, I wasn't afraid of being alone on this path. Cutting ties with my family, rather than ignoring myself for years, was the truest way to love myself again and realize my worth. This wasn't the end of a journey, it was the real beginning of my life. When I hung up the phone, the turmoil inside me lingered. Speaking to my mom for the last time was emotionally draining, but it also gave me a sense of freedom. All the pressure from them, the years of disappointment, were now behind me. But this emptiness had begun to teach me something. I had to stop being a figure shaped solely by others' expectations and find my own path. In the mornings, I started focusing on my work as before. This time, nothing could pull me away from the chaotic world waiting outside. Finding inner peace and accepting my own worth had become more important than anything else. That day, as I arrived at my workplace, I noticed something. Reflecting on the time I'd spent in my previous life, always rushing to keep up, trying not to miss opportunities, fulfilling every responsibility, I realized how different things were now. Once lost in that crowd, I was now creating a space of my own. A few days later, when I entered my office one morning, I noticed a significant shift in my work environment. I'd received an offer to partner with another company, a chance that brought both great responsibility and opportunity. But this time, this decision wasn't just about my career, it was a new step in my personal life as well. On one hand, the confidence I'd built over years of work, and on the other, the resolute voice inside me told me how right this choice was. As I carved my own path, I saw how everything started to become clearer. I was no longer making decisions based on others' lifestyles or opinions, but entirely on my own values. One evening, after leaving the office, I walked outside. Though a fleeting sense of loneliness returned under the city lights, it was no longer frightening. On the contrary, it gave me immense strength. My solitude had ceased to be a nightmare and instead brought me freedom and self-respect. After years of burdens tied to my family, I'd realized how vital it was to love myself again. In that moment, I felt I'd fully taken control of my life. A few weeks later, my partnership with Amelia reached a significant milestone. Everything had progressed so quickly that not only my work but also my inner transformation was accelerating day by day. I began to rediscover myself not just as a businesswoman but as a person. After my relationship with my family ended, I'd finally found my inner strength and was moving forward, free from the burdens of the past. The things that once caused me pain had now become the source of my power. As I forged my path, every obstacle I encountered offered me a chance to grow stronger. One day, as I sat at the helm of my business, memories of the chaotic periods of my old life came to mind. In that moment, I realized something. For all those years, the more I served others, the more I lost myself. My family had seen me as a figure meant to serve others, and I'd accepted that role. But now, after all those years, I'd found true freedom and rediscovered my identity. I no longer needed my family's approval or expectations. My path would be shaped solely by my own choices. That day, as I sat in my office one morning working on a new project on my computer, I was tackling one of the biggest steps in my career. But there was something more. This project was driven not just by others but by my focus on myself, guided solely by my decisions. Every step, every new business opportunity brought me more freedom and strength. Moving away from my family, past relationships, and disappointments showed me who I truly was and what I wanted to achieve. Rediscovering myself and recognizing my worth finally brought me true peace and power. In that moment, I realized once again how precious my life was and that I needed to find myself on this journey. From now on, everything that belonged to me in this life stemmed not from others' demands but from finding the strength within me. With each passing day, I felt stronger. Visiting my office in San Francisco, I realized that every step brought me freedom. For years, I'd lived under my family's pressures and in line with their interests. But now I knew how vital it was to make my own choices and find my own worth. Carving my own path was a revolution, not just in my work but in my entire life. And perhaps realizing how valuable I truly was at the end of it all was my greatest reward. That morning, while working in the office, my phone rang. The number belonged to a business call I hadn't seen before. A while back, I'd met with an investor but hadn't heard anything since. I quickly answered. "Natalie, hello," said the man's voice. "Do you remember our meeting? We'd like to collaborate with you. We want to see you involved in the new project." My eyes lit up. This opportunity felt like the culmination of all the chances I'd been offered and turned down years ago. Looking back, I'd missed so many opportunities. But this time was different. This job wasn't just about my career. It was an affirmation of my inner strength and my own path. I didn't hesitate. "Yes, we can meet," I said. "I'd like to consider your offer." After hanging up, I sat at my desk and took a deep breath. Opportunities I'd once doubted and shied away from were now coming to me because I'd earned them. I remembered that final conversation with my family. I thought about what my mom and dad had said, how much their words had hurt me. But now those wounds had led to my rebirth. The life once shaped by their pressures had ended in an instant, and I'd forged my own path. That day after work, I went for a walk on the beach. The wind on my face felt like it was carrying me away from the past. As I left the city behind, I grew more peaceful. Something inside me said this journey wasn't over, that I was merely on the cusp of a new beginning. Walking along the shore, I couldn't help but think about the last 10 years. My relationship with my family, the effort I'd put in, the sacrifices. I reflected on how everything had led to this point, how it had all ended meaningfully. After a while, I sat down at a cafe. I ordered a coffee and began observing the people around me. They were all immersed in their own worlds, dealing with their own problems. For a moment, I felt like a stranger in this crowd. But that strangeness didn't bother me. On the contrary, it was now easier to find myself within this crowd. Freeing myself from the burdens of the past, and my family had given me the chance to discover my own identity. When my phone rang, it was a message from an old friend. "Natalie, hi, we should have a meeting soon. Let's review the results of last week's work." This offer promised something new, not just professionally but personally as well. With the strength of reinventing myself, I accepted the proposal. That day, amidst the city's crowd, I'd perhaps found the self I'd lost for years. From now on, I wouldn't just serve others, I'd serve myself too. This wasn't merely a career shift. It was about accepting my worth in every aspect of my life and choosing my own path. Though my relationship with my family had caused me so much pain in the past, I no longer needed to carry that pain inside me. Everything that once made me feel inadequate now reminded me of my strength. I knew the time had come for everything to fall into place. This was a new beginning, both in my work and emotionally. As the days passed, the peace within me grew stronger. Through ending my relationship with my family, I began to realize that everything I once thought was missing was actually within me all along. With the strength of knowing myself, I started taking more steps in both my professional and personal life. My successes at work and the new business relationships I developed with old colleagues constantly reminded me of one thing: recognizing my own worth was the key to success in life. One morning, while sitting in my San Francisco office, I received an email. Contained feedback about a project we'd completed a few weeks earlier. As I read it, I felt my confidence in my work growing. For years, while serving others, I'd never focused this much on my own projects. Now my work was progressing rapidly, and I was creating new opportunities every moment. Pursuing my own dreams, the thoughts and expectations others had imposed on me had become distant memories. One evening, as I walked outside, I reflected on myself. I thought about how my past experiences had shaped me, but also how everything had begun to transform with the passing of that moment. My ties with my family were severed, but that void had turned into an opportunity that made me stronger. Now I valued only myself, not others, and I was building my life accordingly. Life in San Francisco was moving fast. My business was growing, and new opportunities awaited me at every turn. Yet, amidst all these changes, there were still those broken emotions inside me. One day, I received a message from my mom. At another time, I might have brushed it off or left it unanswered. But in that moment, I prepared myself to take another step. Her message read, "Natalie, please come back. We have so much to tell you. We'd love to see you." I picked up the phone. Slowly, I began speaking with my mom. In that moment, I realized I'd reached another turning point in my life. In my last conversations with her, I started expressing my feelings clearly. "Mom, I love you. But you need to accept one truth. For years, I did so much to please you. But now I have to create my own life. When I accepted my own worth, I didn't need anyone else. This was the right path." My mom listened in deep silence. "Natalie, I understand you. I'm accepting it now. Maybe we didn't realize the pressure we put on you all these years. But hearing that you want to carve your own path, I understand I need to respect that." This was the most honest conversation I'd ever had with my mom. The years of silence between us began to unravel in that moment. Some of the brokenness and pain inside me eased with this exchange. I couldn't imagine a moment where we'd fully reshape ourselves as a family, but I still felt something had changed. A week later, I made a short visit to my old home with my mom. Though we didn't fully understand each other yet, we were taking steps to carve out a new place for each other in our lives. The void inside me, no matter how vast, was slowly closing. This new relationship with my family might be the start of something beginning anew. But this time without carrying all the burdens on my shoulders. That day, as I walked in a park and looked at the trees and nature around me, I felt like I'd found meaning in everything for the first time in my life. Knowing myself was about finding my inner strength, not serving others. This brought me a peace I'd never felt before. What others thought or how they acted no longer affected me. I'd realized how important it was to love myself. As I moved forward, I noticed that everything was taking shape, not just in my professional world but in my personal life too, and I was growing more confident in myself. I'd rediscovered my worth. While completing my past relationship with my family, I learned that the most valuable thing was accepting myself. Looking back, I thought about how all those pains and disappointments from the past had taught me so much. Everything in my life was now shaped by my own choices. Others' demands, expectations, or desires no longer influenced my life. Carving my own path gave me a true sense of freedom, both inwardly and outwardly. This point in my life was the beginning of everything anew. After my final conversations with my family, I felt free from all the burdens within me. Being emotionally distant from my family was painful, but it was also making me stronger. It was a necessary step for me to truly accept who I was. I no longer had to prove myself to anyone. My worth was something only I could define. That morning, as I left my office in San Francisco, I'd never felt so at peace under the city lights. New job opportunities and projects that developed and empowered me lay ahead. But most importantly, I was now recognizing my inner strength, my own value. The wounds of the past no longer held me back. On the contrary, they were making me stronger. Where I once cared about how others saw me, now I was solely the follower of my own path. One evening, I stepped out of my house for a walk. The city's crowds, the sounds, the people walking briskly, all of it surrounded me, yet as I passed through them, I found the silence within myself. Others' opinions no longer affected me. I didn't have to belong to anyone. I realized how liberating it was to just be myself. In the past, I tried to live according to the expectations of my family and those around me. But now I was on my own path. I slowly entered the park. Sitting there, I thought about how long I'd been lost. The years I'd spent with my family had always been shaped by their expectations. But now I'd found my identity and discovered my inner strength. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I was at peace. There was a feeling inside me that everything would turn out right. All the pain the past had brought me was now making me stronger. Sometime later, my phone rang. It was a message from Amelia. "Natalie, shall we start the new project? Everything's ready. I'm just waiting for your approval." This message showed me that something had truly changed, that a new era was beginning. Everything was different now. In this project, I'd move forward with my own strength, making my own choices. I was no longer living for others. This journey was a fresh start, not just in my career but personally as well. In every step I took in the business world, I carried this freedom and strength with me. Carving my own path had liberated me, not just materially but emotionally too. Ending my ties with my family had been hard, but it taught me something. Everything begins with one's own identity and worth. I didn't need anyone's approval, love, or expectations. The most important thing for me was accepting myself. A week later, Amelia and I started the new project. Things in the business world were moving quickly, and each step brought me more confidence and freedom. Pain tied to my family was no longer an obstacle in my life. It was just a lesson that made me stronger. Thinking about the future, I no longer felt anxious. I'd realized how vital it was to love myself and find what's true. There was peace within me. Under the city lights, I felt reborn. In place of the lost years and shattered dreams of the past, there was now a brand new beginning. As I walked my own path, I didn't need anyone or anything. The most valuable thing for me had become finding my own worth and identity. In the late hours of the night, sitting alone in the park, I heard the voice within me. This was the peace I'd been searching for all these years. Now there was a life that belonged to no one but me. And this was where everything began.